Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon. It depends on which side of the Atlantic you are. Welcome to the second dialogue of the Jean Monnet Atlantic Network number 2. In this case, we are going to talk about energy and sustainability. And specifically, we will address the transatlantic vision of the green agenda for the post-pandemic recovery. We know that there is a large consensus that we need to impulse a greener economy for the recovery after the COVID crisis. And we want to address, to comment, to discuss the opportunities that this recovery, this next years offers, and also the challenges. For that, we will have 2 presentations and 3 comments from the participants from the different partners of the Jean Monnet Atlantic Network. The presenters are, in first place, Daniela Stevens. She's currently research professor of the Division of International Studies in FIDE. She's a doctor in political science from the American University in Washington, and she holds a master in political science from el Colegio de Mexico. And the second presenter is Rim Berahab. She is currently economist at the Policy Center for the New South in Rabat, in Morocco. She is the partner in Morocco of the network. And she holds an engineering degree from the National Institute for Statistics and Applied Economics. And she's working on issues related to international trade, regional integration, and specific on energy issues, among others. The comments will come from other partners. The first from Rodrigo Pimentel on behalf of FGV. Hi, Rodrigo. The second comment will come from Frank Mateis from the Institute of European Studies in the Université Libre de Bruxelles. And the third one will be Carmen Fonseca from IPRINOVA, the Instituto Português de Relações Internacionais. Hello, Carmen, welcome. And well, before coming, I need to do some starting remarks. The first is that all the statements expressed in the webinar exclusively represent the opinions of the participants and not the FGV's institutional position. The second is that I remember the participants that this event is being recorded and will be posted in the FGV's official channels, and your participation implies your consent. And finally, the last remarks is addressed to the people who is following us in the YouTube channel, to stress them, to encourage to send your questions through the chat that will be sent to the authors by me, the moderator, if we have enough time. But we will try to answer all your questions. Well, I will not spend more time in presentations, because I think the important is to have a good discussion and a change of ideas. So I will go to the first presentation. Daniela. Daniela will present the question of new green winds coming from US with a question mark. Is a new green winds coming from US. So she will address the Joe Biden's agenda to try to reconstruct the international climate change initiatives, and which are the implications for the transatlantic cooperation and the global agenda in general, I think. So Daniela, please, can you start with your presentation?
Of course, Anna, thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me to FGV and for this exciting opportunity to share thoughts of a nascent paper. Well, Democrat Joe Biden enters the US presidency with a historical opportunity of addressing climate change like none of his predecessors. He assured that his country would produce carbon-free electricity by 2035 and reach zero net emissions mid-century. Given the magnitude of these challenges, the US cannot reach these goals alone. and is already planning on how to harness global alliances and transatlantic alliances to pursue a more ambitious international climate change agenda. In this very nascent paper, I intend to explore the implications of these efforts for transatlantic cooperation. However, before getting to the international agenda in the paper and in this presentation, I will begin by outlining the key domestic institutions that can buttress Biden's administration climate change objectives. Whereas in the second part, I will be highlighting the international conditions under which a deeper transatlantic coordination could be bolstered and in turn contribute to climate change mitigation. Although these early observations that I'll discuss today are purely empirical thus far, for my work, I will find theoretical grounding in the literature of international political economy. So let me start with the domestic policy. As expected, Joe Biden began his administration by signing executive actions that reversed more than 100 Trump administration mandates that weaken environmental regulation. The idea behind executive orders, or decrees as we know them in Latin America, is to exercise presidential authority under existing laws rather than passing new ones. Given that most bills will have to be passed with a 60-vote majority in the Senate, and his party only controls around 50 seats, his agenda will tend to focus on regulatory measures such as energy efficiency and fuel standards. However, the effect of executive orders is not always expeditious and carries some uncertainty. They can be challenged in court, and the conservative majority in the Supreme Court is a potential obstacle to govern by decree. Similarly, lawsuits from states and industries that could be subject to any executive action could delay their progress. Even without Congress, the president's field of action in some areas is relatively broad. To implement measures that reduce carbon emissions, Biden will likely redesign the Obama administration's Clean Power Plan that Trump replaced with lax regulations. Nevertheless, going back to Obama-era regulations is not enough. On the one hand, science has advanced and made more accurate forecasts regarding the effects of climate change. And on the other hand, the Clean Energy Plan did not lead the US to meet the climate goals pledged under the Paris Agreement. Therefore, the new president, the new administration must develop a more impactful set of regulations rather than reworking the law. With Biden in the White House, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, will restore its position as a protective institution. But other agencies, other executive agencies in particular, will have a prominent role as well. For example, under the direction of the Department of Energy, the DOE, new and more ambitious and more rigorous standards for the use of fuels can influence both energy and transportation, both sectors, and accelerate the electrification of light and medium-duty vehicles. Since transportation is the fastest growing source of greenhouse gases in the United States, these measures would not be trivial if they were implemented jointly with the federal government's procurement system to prioritize the use of zero-emission vehicles in the federal fleet and also in public transportation alongside the states. The Department of Energy also has the ability to restart federal credit programs for clean energy progress and to tighten other efficiency standards, for example, those of appliances. Another agency, the Department of Treasury. Well, the administration can develop tax incentives for environmentally responsible companies and together with large funders in the financial industry, create rules for publicly traded companies to be transparent in their processes and report on the risks of climate change. Another example is the Department of the Interior, which could lessen the bureaucratic burden of federal permits to build renewable energy projects, for example. In this sense, the administration's ability to create alliances with the private sector will be critical, even more so in circumstances in which some of the large industrial blocs that have resisted climate change policies begin to fracture. In August of last year, Volvo, Ford, Honda, BMW, Volkswagen, these companies agreed to stricter emission limits with the state of California, challenging the Trump administration efforts to repeal these very rules. More recently, General Motors, which had sided with Trump back then in August, stopped his siding with the former administration and announced last month that it will only sell zero-emission vehicles by 2035 as part of a broader plan to become carbon neutral in 2040. So the opportunity for Joe Biden is to take advantage of the industrial momentum for regulatory homogenization across the country and competition with China to implement federal legislation in car manufacturing and electricity generation, green infrastructure. In this sense, his economic recovery package will be key to build, for example, charging stations for electric vehicles, to encourage the purchase of this type of cars among the broader public, and again, to install it in the federal fleet via the procurement programs. These foreseeable actions have huge ramifications for two sectors, the oil and gas, whose fate is closely tied to the internal combustion engine, and which represents the most difficult front in the transition, I believe. Biden campaigned to eliminate some tax subsidies to these companies and use them to partially fund his climate plan. But changes in taxes of this magnitude require the support of Congress, and that is to be seen whether it happens or not. Now, let me discuss some of the elements regarding foreign policy. Well, President Biden insists that the fight against climate change will be an essential part of his foreign policy and his national security agendas and his post-COVID recovery agenda. Following his inauguration, he also resorted to an executive order to rejoin the Paris Agreement. Besides recommitting the US, the goal of joining the Paris Agreement is to pressure other countries to increase ambition of their own national climate goals, the so-called National Determined Contributions, NDCs, at the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change. However, rejoining the agreement is only the first step. On the one hand, the administration will have to commit to solid domestic objectives and results to exercise any kind of leadership outside its borders, starting with increasing the ambition of its own NDC. But how does this align with the rest of the world? Well, expectations for COP26, the climate summit that will be convened in Glasgow in November of 2021, are higher, given the commitments of the main emitters. The United Kingdom, for example, committed to stop funding fossil fuel projects abroad. The European Union will push to cut emissions by 55% compared to 1990 levels by 2030. China, Japan, South Korea have set long-term carbon reduction goals. And although Biden has committed to net zero emissions by 2050, he will have to do it in writing in the NDC. The special envoy for climate, John Kerry, who will be key, a person to follow throughout this administration, he just announced that the US would host an international climate summit on April 22nd, which is Earth Day, and that he will announce specific new emission reduction targets. On the other hand, in addition to demonstrating the viability of their own goals, the administration will have to work hard with the international community to restore lost credibility. During the Trump administration, the international community realized that the US was both indispensable and unreliable in the fight against climate change. So in the first couple of months of the administration, Kerry's priority has been to seek alliances with European leaders, since the strategic alliance with the European Union is the best opportunity to pressure China to increase its own ambition. There is at least a 4-year window to revive the transatlantic ties and to invoke again the multilateralism that characterized it. US and European Union collaboration is particularly meaningful. China's pledge to be carbon neutral by 2060 could curb global warming by 0.3 or 0.3 degrees Celsius this century, which is huge. But that commitment needs to be only the starting point. A joint approach from the European Union and the US could push Beijing to go further, especially on near-term emission cuts. Regarding its commitments regarding adaptation, part of the rebuilding of the American reputation will be in resuming the financial commitment that Trump canceled, which was providing $2 billion to the United Nations Green Climate Fund to help vulnerable countries adapt to the already reversible effects of the drastic and sustained change in temperatures. Finally, the new administration could take the advantage of its weight in international economy by holding its trading partners, its closest trading partners like Canada and Mexico, accountable for their contributions to global warming, an opportunity that the previous administration lost in their renegotiation of the USMCA. Such a pressure would generate, of course, its own complications. For example, in a symbolic act, Biden resigned the presidential permit for the construction of the Keystone XL pipeline between the US and Canada. Given that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau supports the project, supports the Keystone pipeline, this decision could damage the relationship between the two countries, in addition to jeopardizing the environmental reputation that the Canadian government has built for itself. The same could be said about the pipeline currently being halted between Russia and Germany that could bring natural gas to Germany and for the rest of the European countries for that matter. What is going to happen between Biden and the German administration? Biden wants the pipeline to keep the project to keep halted. Germany wants to set it back on. That has to be one of his priorities. It's a conundrum because he wants to revitalize relations with Germany, but Russia stands in the middle. To summarize, my research pretends to assess how domestic and international power politics, economic interest, normative environments define the direction of the multiple bilateralisms between the US, the European Union, contingent on the polarized US politics. The Biden administration has an opportunity to signal to the markets, to the international community, to the voters who gave him an international mandate, that he has a serious commitment to the planet, and also to solidify strategic alliance with the European Union to pursue mitigation. The task won't be an easy one, but it must be faced alongside the obstacles to economic recovery in the midst of the global pandemic. Thank you very much, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Daniela, to be and your time perfectly. And I think a lot of questions have arisen now, and in the discussion we'll continue to have the opportunity to discuss. And now we will pass to the second presentation. Karim Berahaf will present the paper towards green recovery in Africa, also with question mark. In the case, he will focus in the case of Nigeria, but Nigeria is a big country in Africa with a lot of impact on the whole region. So Rim, please, can you take the floor?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this introduction. So I'm very pleased to be part of the Jean Monnet Network again, and I would like to thank the organizers for hosting this webinar. So for my presentation, I would like to give the perspective, as you said, of the African continent, Nigeria in particular, and talk about energy and sustainability in the context of economic recovery post-pandemic. So starting from a continental perspective, the issue of green recovery in Africa is an important one, given the current context that the world is experiencing. So now Africa must simultaneously meet the triple challenge of fighting the pandemic, boosting the economy, and ensuring its sustainability. So given its geographical position in Africa and the Atlantic Basin, and also given its weight in the African economy, Nigeria constitutes a very interesting case study. So I would like to articulate the analysis of this case around three main axes. First, a glance at the structural energy challenges pre-COVID-19. Second, an overview of the impact of COVID-19 on the energy sector. And third, a look at the ways to build a better and resilient energy future. So starting with the first point, despite its enormous domestic endowment of energy resources, Nigeria faces a persistent energy crisis. So first of all, as all of you know, oil is the main driver of the Nigerian economy. It's the country's leading export item and the main provider of tax revenues for the central government and of foreign exchange reserves. But despite this importance, the oil sector has not broadened the productive base of the Nigerian economy. So according to the National Bureau of Statistics of Nigeria, the petroleum industry contributes less than 10% of Nigeria's GDP. Also, compared to its weight in the economy, the oil industry is not very labor intensive. So as a result, this heavy dependence on oil has been blamed for the weak performance of other sectors like manufacturing or agriculture. And this dependence has also been detrimental to economic growth itself, as the price of crude oil in the international market is highly volatile, which leaves Nigeria vulnerable to major crises. In addition, the oil sector suffers also from numerous disruptions of supply. So according to the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, nearly 98% of pipeline breaks that occurred between the year 2000 and 2019 were attributed to acts of vandalization. Furthermore, several oil companies have declared force majeure throughout the years, which of course led to important economic losses. Now, aside from oil, Nigeria has the largest proven gas reserves in Africa and is the 10th largest worldwide as of 2019. Yet gas production remains low and unstable. Another acute challenge facing the gas industry in Nigeria is gas flaring, which is defined as the controlled burning of natural gas that cannot be processed for sale or use because of technical or economic reasons. So although Nigeria has made notable progress in this area, the country remains the 7th largest gas flaring nation in the world, which of course, again, entails significant economic and environmental costs as well. Now, moving away from oil and gas and looking into infrastructure, Nigeria's energy infrastructure has not expanded as rapidly as population growth, despite important public expenditures. So in the electricity sector in particular, net electricity generation is far lower than the capacity installed. So for instance, it stood at around 28% of the total capacity as of 2017. Nigeria's transmission system is also well below the total installed capacity and is characterized by high losses on the grid, which reflect critical operational challenges. And similarly, Africa's distribution companies suffer significant losses as well, with nearly 46% of energy lost due to technical, commercial, or collection issues. So all of these challenges have resulted in a low and unreliable access to electricity or energy in general. So currently, according to the World Bank, only 53% of Nigeria's population have access to grid electricity. And again, also according to the World Bank, the economic costs of power outages or shortages in Nigeria is equivalent to around 2% of its GDP on average. Now, moving to my second point, so as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic disrupted the global health economic system. The energy sector was not spared, of course. It fell into a deep crisis, and oil economies like Nigeria's were severely hit. So regarding the oil and gas industry, on the demand side, the restrictions imposed in response to the pandemic have reduced demand for oil from Nigeria's major trading partners. And domestic demand has also declined due to the lack of domestic industrial activities and restrictions on the movements of people. Also, the fall in oil prices has led to a significant decline in Nigeria's oil and gas exports in 2020. Now, on the supply side, Nigeria significantly reduced its crude oil and gas production. It also cut on the operation of oil and gas companies. But despite that, it faced an oversupply at first, as it was not able to sell its excess oil production during the months following the pandemic or the lockdowns. So as a consequence, Nigeria plunged into another period of recession and was left in a situation of dramatic government revenue shortfall, which can put increased pressure on its economic growth. Now, regarding the renewable energy industry, so despite the COVID-19 crisis, there has been an increased wave of government involvement, philanthropic activities, and public-private partnerships. So, for instance, the African Development Bank and the Nigerian government launched a $200 million national electrification project to address energy access deficits by channeling private sector investments into mini-grid and off-grid solutions. But then again, despite this growth in investments, some projects in the renewable energy industry may still be delayed due to restrictions in operation, pricing, and illiquidity. Besides, this industry could also experience an increase in capital costs in the short term due to rising financial costs and commercial constraints resulting from restrictions on global mobility, supply chains interruptions, and reduced industrial activity. Now, looking at the power sector, the lockdown introduced by the Nigerian government has resulted in the complete closure or reduction of operation of many businesses in Nigeria. Thereby, it significantly reduced their net electricity consumption. And this has resulted in further financial losses for the electricity distribution companies or DISCOs, and could further aggravate their already precarious financial situation. So revenue losses to DISCOs could be further exacerbated by the difficult economic conditions faced by consumers who are now mostly residentials, since their ability and willingness to pay electricity bills may be hindered by the pandemic. And also construction activities of critical renewable power projects by the government may again be delayed due to stalled investment decisions, and several reforms planned by the government might also be postponed, such as the upward revision for electricity tariffs, which was scheduled in 2020. So now that we have covered the energy challenges faced by Nigeria before COVID-19 and the impact of the latter on the energy industry, so let's look at the future. So if we take a glance at energy reforms post-pandemic, Nigeria adopted an economic sustainability plan called the NESP, which includes some provisions regarding energy. So it carried a solar power strategy, which aims to install 5 million solar home systems and mini-grids, thus impacting up to 25 million beneficiaries and supporting up to 250,000 jobs, while at the same time promoting the local production of solar components and appliances. The NESP also introduces a national gas expansion program, which focuses on accelerating the transition of Nigeria to a post-oil era. And last but not least, the NESP has proposed a very ambitious reform of deregulating the price of refined petroleum products. So while containing symbolic green gestures, the NESP does not espouse green growth as a fundamental objective, since renewable energy and energy transition strategies represents only 15% of its budget. So now the question that arises is how to create the structures for the transformation of the Nigeria's energy sector. So if we're being realistic, it is very unlikely that Nigeria will abandon oil in the short term. The country needs to undergo significant transformation to be able to even consider this. Rather, the transformation over the short to medium term will most likely translate into a more diversified energy mix and a stronger regulatory and policy framework that supports both the development of new energy technologies and safeguards the economy from the volatility of forward oil prices. And for this to happen, Nigeria must also diversify its economy so that it is not solely dependent on oil revenues. So given Nigeria's abundant natural gas reserves, the latter can be used as a transitional fuel to buy time for putting the appropriate transition structures in place. So in the electricity sector, natural gas can also contribute to grid stability by compensating for the intermittent nature of renewable energy. And in terms of electricity access, the development of decentralized solutions need to supplement the efforts of decentralized grid extension. So the mini-grid sector in Nigeria started to develop only recently. And as of 2019, nearly 59 mini-grids operate in Nigeria, of which 52 use solar power. Also, efforts in developing a legal and institutional framework for mini-grids have also fairly recently started by the adoption in 2017 of the regulations for mini-grids. Finally, facilitating the transition will also require significant investments in financing. So the reform of oil subsidies in Nigeria, if effectively implemented, could generate significant savings that can be used to support the renewable energy sector, to counter the price disparity with fossil fuels and encourage research and development. And beyond public investment, the government should also incentivize the private sector to foster a green economy as well. And in addition, investment should also promote upstream value chain development so that Nigeria builds local plants for the manufacturing or assembly of renewable energy equipment. And this raises the issue of investing in human capital to ensure a skilled local workforce that will be able to meet the needs of the new technologies that are emerging. So beyond technology and financing, alignment between Nigeria's international obligations and domestic policies and legislations is of utmost importance. So if Nigeria is serious about achieving a sustainable and resilient future, it must determine the right policy mix and funding to position itself as a true energy leader in Africa and in the Atlantic Basin overall. It should also ensure an adequate coordination and coherence, but also accountability with regards to the different policies and strategies governing the power sector and renewable energies. Now, on to my last point, which is the Atlantic dimension. As one of the major energy producers in the South Atlantic Basin, Nigeria has the potential to position itself as a major energy player in the region, provided it addresses its major energy challenges and seizes the opportunity to transform its energy sector. And to achieve these objectives, strengthening, of course, transatlantic cooperation will be necessary. So cooperation between Nigeria and the US, for instance, is not new. So in 1999, both countries have signed an MOU on energy policies. And more recently, in 2014, they signed another MOU regarding the Power Africa initiative, which aims to increase the amount of electricity available in sub-Saharan Africa. Nigeria and the EU have also concluded many partnerships covering a wide range of areas, among which is to strengthen national efforts to manage their energy resources more efficiently and effectively. Now there is also the question of the implication of the European Green Deal on oil exporting countries in the future. And these points need to be further investigated with regards to the impact on Nigeria. And regarding intra-African cooperation, a gas pipeline project between Nigeria and Morocco has been in discussion since 2016. And this pipeline would connect Nigerian gas to every coastal country in West Africa and in Tangier, Morocco, and Cadiz, Spain. However, according to some analysts, this pipeline faces a myriad of challenges. But nonetheless, the front-end engineering and design has entered the second phase by March 2020. So to conclude, further cooperation between Nigeria's and countries of the Atlantic Basin across the energy sector will be of great benefit to the transatlantic community. So building on past achievements and addressing current challenges must continue with greater urgency to forge a resilient and self-sufficient energy systems. So now countries of the Atlantic Basin have a window of opportunity to formulate coherent investment strategies, develop and deploy new energy technologies, as well as synchronize their engagements with global geopolitical challenges, particularly from Russia and China, without losing sight of the opportunities that developing countries of the Atlantic Basin, like Nigeria, offer in terms of energy resources. So thank you for your attention.
Many thanks, Rim. Thank you for your speech. I think we should discuss more about that, the possibilities of regional and interregional cooperation in the region. So now we pass to the comments. And the first position, Roderico Pimentel, can you start with your comments? 10 minutes, please.
Oh, yes.
10, 12.
Thank you very much. I would like, of course, thank you very much to organizers of the meeting and the possibility to talk with you about all these themes. It's difficult to organize. It's so many subjects altogether that it's complicated to put them in the same picture. But starting about something about Daniel, I would like to, at the beginning, to agree very much with the choice of an institutional point of view to analyze the power sector. And I think that we can only think about energy looking at the institutions and players, because they are crucial, and the power sector is embedded in the society. So I think that's this connection, looking at an institutional point of view, absolutely crucial to analyze the power sector. Climate change, of course, makes energy decisions multilateral, because they cross the border of the countries. So it's one kind of question that asks for an international kind of governance. And that's one of the big problems when we discuss energy questions. Electricity, in particular, has been considered in the past a non-tradable commodity. It's not exactly non-tradable anymore. Many countries are marketing electricity, but it still has a development that's very independent. So the solutions were independent. So if you look at this US Green New policies, they looking from South America, I don't think that they have a very strong effort impact in South America. South America is different from Mexico. In Mexico, relationships with the United States are stronger. Here, we are historically a bit far away from the big international American interests. I think that we look at the power sector, we have crucial questions related to technological developments and manpower, because Brazil is interesting in this point of view, because we are dealing with how to incorporate more renewables, and we have a very renewable power system, basically based on hydro. The chance from hydro is getting to the limits, and we are increasing wind and solar power. But it's extremely complicated to put all these things together, because the nature of the renewable power is that it needs some complementarity. We are maybe facing an expansion of gas generation that we do not consider a good thing. Gas is against fossil fuels. How to keep a renewable power sector and avoid an expansion of fossil fuels? That's the problem we have now. And that's quite a technological problem, because storage is a crucial aspect. We have hydro. We can use the hydro as a storage. But even so, when we expand further on gas and we expand further on solar and wind power, the question of how to deal with them, it becomes very, very difficult to solve. It's strange when you look at the people who operate the system here. You see that sometimes we have wind power. It's very strange. There are some moments when all the wind power in the Northeast region stops blowing. So you have all of a sudden to introduce hydro generation in a huge amount. It's possible, but it brings, when you keep thinking about the increase of this, of the renewables, you keep having a bigger problems. How are you going to deal with them in a situation like that? Well, we have a lot, considering these Atlantic bases and options, of course, we need partnerships in technology development and manpower formation. I don't think the US could be, it seems to be a possible provider. It's much more the relationship between Brazilian and European companies. They are here, Iberdrola, Neoenergia. You have a large number, Endesa, anything, EDF. So we have many European companies here. The doubts I have is, Are they going to go forward, or are we going to have the Chinese? Because the Chinese are also here. So it's going to be an Atlantic operation. We're going to have the Chinese taking over. But anyway, those are questions that need to be solved. And we have a very interesting initial experience because we have a huge hydro system needing complementarity and needs technological solutions. Apart from that, of course, local multilateral institutions are needed to coordinate the climate problems and integration. In South America, maybe Mercosur, we at FGV, we have been very much trying to reinforce the growth of the energy discussions inside Mercosur. Of course, we are not in the best moment in South America for integration in Mercosur, but because we have always domestic political questions and they come and they go. So at one stage, we hope that Mercosur could be an important player in this interconnection. And also this integration of Mercosur and European Union could be a second important aspect that could help in the energy questions we face. If we look at integration between South America and Africa, it's absolutely interesting, but very, very difficult. When you look south to south, we have, first of all, we have a capital problems. The cost of capital in the South region, both here and there, it's higher than in developed countries. It makes it more difficult to find feasible projects because we have to face the capital costs. Apart from that, I mean, when we talk in this kind of integration, we are going to talk about investors and the technological exchange. Nigeria, I had a previous experience in Brazil, trying to build investments in Africa, and it was very, very hard. Nigeria, I should confess, it was out of my radar because institutional conditions in Nigeria were very hard to deal with. Most of the generation there is self-generation. Companies build their own generation, and then the transmission is quite hard, and the institutional situation, at least in the past, was not very favorable for investors. So it's very hard. Looking for and Mozambique. We have tried to do investments there, but we face the Chinese there. So sometimes we are doing partnerships with EDF, for instance, but the Chinese were almost difficult to beat them. And they don't play by market rules. They play for specific rules that are not market rules. So the South and South experience, at least a small experience I had, it was very difficult to move. And although I still think that's important, because when you go to Africa, you need to find two solutions. You need to have a buyer for part of the energy you develop, and you have to get support for increasing the wealth of people in such a way that they could pay for electricity. So you need find some kind of mixed solution, one that gives you enough to cover your investment, and another to help to increase the wealth of population, to introduce electricity at the same time, introduce wealth mechanism that they could make money out there. I think that it's hard, but I still think that connecting South America and Africa is an effort that should be considered. We should try it again, but multilateral institutions are needed to help in these efforts. it's possible, but it's a hard work. So that's basically, I think, I don't think that the COVID will change very much the situation. The COVID experience is the same thing in Nigeria, in Brazil. We have a reduction on the market. We have all the companies facing loss of revenue. It will take some time to recover. It's going to postpone most of the efforts, but I don't think that it changes very much the main picture. The movement in order of getting green energy, it needs popular support. I think that's one of the crucial things. The players have changed very much. We have lost big players, we have small players, but we need them to work together and see if we can change the environmental questions. I mean, and maybe one of the big questions is the gas, because gas is not a good player. Gas is the bad part of the picture. Gas is entering again, bringing fossil fuel when you don't have them. But I don't like very much this thing of gas as an intermediate solution, but still the awareness of how the climate change is a problem. I think if we don't have a crucial mobilization of the population, a cultural change, it's going to be very hard, but it's moving. It's going to take more time, maybe. Well, I'm sorry, I think that's basically what I'd like to add.
Thank you, Rodrigo. A lot of questions also to comment after. I will ask Frank Matthijs to continue with the comments, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Anna, for chairing and also for being the leader of this part of the project. So thanks for your leadership there. So in commenting the two papers, which were quite insightful, so thank you again to the presenters for it. The easiest way to comment them is a bit to try and connect them and see where they speak to each other. And one very obvious connection is to look at US-Africa relations and US-Nigeria relations in particular, where energy is quite important, and see how different transitions might be impacting on that, since this is one of the main vectors of transatlantic relations, not only North Atlantic, but north to South Atlantic, and it is quite striking if you look at the weight of Africa for US energy consumption, as Africa is the largest region from which oil is imported to the US, even more than the Middle East, and Nigeria, of course, plays a key role. Not only Nigeria, also Angola, many Central African countries, etc. But it is a key resource for the US. So over 20% of oil imports come from Africa, and this is, of course, possibly going to change if this whole transition, this green transition with the new government in the US, if this is really getting off track. So this would have tremendous impact on the way US-Africa relations are being held, and particularly US-Nigeria, which Nigeria's has been since 1998. So when there was a political transition within Nigeria, Nigeria was deemed a key strategic partner for the US energy policy. So this all what we've grown to know over the last decades, this might be about to change, and we have to somehow put it into a larger context of US-Africa relations, and what is likely to change now from Trump to Biden, and what is likely to stay the same. So we can expect that that there will be certain continuities in these relations, and particularly in security, the whole the whole idea of the war on terror, of containing jihadism, that this still remains a major interest of the US. This has not really changed, no matter who has been the president in the White House over the last 20, 30 years. So this has been always a continuum, and this is unlikely to change. What is then more likely to change is development aid, how a multilateral approach to Africa is being done. We've seen under Trump that there's been a very clear attempt to instrumentalize development aid to Africa more, to say, well, if we send any aid to Africa, then we need to have real returns to it. So it's not just for supporting human rights or whatever, but there must be a direct benefit, and securing energy linkages was clearly a priority there. So this is not to say that before Trump there was no interest, no geopolitical interest of the US in development aid, but it hasn't been as evident as it was under Trump. So this is more likely to change, at least in the framing, in the narrative, that the key countries to partner with in Africa for the US are again more likely to be those strategic points, and that are not necessarily only economic interest or only security interest, but that there's a broader set of interests. So this might be about a change, and this could then mean that that particularly such key relationships with countries such as Nigeria. I mean, President Buhari was one of the few African presidents who got to meet Trump. So there was clearly an awareness that this is an important partner, that if the energy transition goes on, there will be less incentives to uphold that relationship. I think this is not only a Nigerian issue, but this is also true for many of the other oil exporters, particularly the other countries of the Gulf of Guinea, but down to Angola, who play a role. And with this, I'd like to come to the second point, which came through in both of the papers, but was maybe not front-loaded, and I'd like to bring it back, which is issues of governance and also stability in oil exporting countries. Because if we assume that, well, as Rim, for instance, you rightly mentioned, well, the volatility of oil prices and the downfall of oil prices is something that already happened pre-COVID, and it's been intensified a bit with a crisis, but it's not necessarily completely new. But if this trend continues, if the energy transition moves on, then we'll also see massive impact on the governance of those oil exporting countries. And what many of these countries have in common, whether they're in Africa, but also if you look at Venezuela, that they're fairly that there's a whole governance model built around oil exports, because these are economic grants that are relatively easy to capture from state elites. It's being in political power in these countries usually means that you also have access to economic resources, to the export revenues of usually state-owned enterprises. So this had led to a series of quite clientelistic states with presidents that are generally not very keen to leave power on their own. Precisely because being in power also means that it's not just political power but also economic power. So if we look at Central African countries, there's a series of presidents that have been there for 30, 40 years, and that really have captured these oil rents. Of course, they're not alone. They are part of a network of a pan-Atlantic network in many cases, of oil companies. So ever since the scandals of the French company Elf, this has been exposed quite clearly how other oil companies are involved into setting up corruption networks and helping to stay certain leaders in power. So this has been very clear in the French case, but there are other Western companies that are fueling this. So this all puts then the question: well, if we have this transition going on, so what does it mean for those countries which have been so centered on certain political figures? So less Nigeria maybe, which had several changes of government, but many others. But even Nigeria, you could say, well, it's already a miracle that Nigeria still exists today as a country, because there's so many different forces pulling it apart and a lot of secessionism. So if those revenues, if those rents are going to be reduced, what does it mean for the stability of the country? What does it mean for forceful changes of government that might be ahead, for popular uprisals, etc.? So we see in Venezuela also quite clearly on the other side of the Atlantic where this mix can lead to. And as a last point here, then, apart from the political aspect, also what came through, and Anna, you mentioned this also, is the question of regional integration. And we know that usually oil exporters are very, very weak on regional integration. Rim, you mentioned, well, there are attempts to break through this with this pipeline, for instance, but generally there's relatively few regional value chains. There are the regional trade among Central African countries, for instance, is very, very low, because most of them are exporting oil to the global market. So there's not so much incentive to build up a regional value chain. So this is certainly a big challenge economically. So if those countries want to somewhat move towards a post-fossil into a post-fossil world where they can't sell their oil as easily as they used to, they really have to think about, well, how do we integrate within our region? And we've seen that this transition is not always very easy with the African free trade the continental free trade area. We've seen that usually countries that are a bit reluctant to liberalize trade on a Pan-African level are often oil exporters, because for them the benefits are not so immediately evident, because their exports are usually not facing tariffs in any case, because they're exporting oil to the world market. So those are just to wrap up. So these were a few things that came to my mind. So how these different effects on both sides of the Atlantic will affect also the US-Africa relationship and change it, the governance of those countries that have to adapt to a different energy model, and also the question of regional integration. And with this, I give back the floor to Anna for the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Now we have the last comment for Carmen Fonseca. Please, can you start?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Daniela and Rim, for your interesting presentations about such a current and relevant topic, but also very much challenger. And after listening you both, there are some thoughts and more questions than answers that came to my mind regarding the energy transition and the green agenda. In a time when Portugal holds the European Union presidency, these are topics that we are used to listen since they are among the Portuguese and the European priorities. Actually, the European Union is the biggest provider in the world for climate finance in the fight against climate change. The European Green Deal launched and approved by the European Union, is the biggest plan to economic recovery in a green basis. The European Union member states agreed to reduce CO2 emissions in 10 years as the US. However, some limits, some handicaps have already been identified in the European Green Deal, namely the convergence between the economic growth strategy and the sustainable transition. Furthermore, there are some doubts about the ability of Europe to achieve even the 2020 targets. As Daniela mentioned, if the US cannot achieve these kinds of goals alone, the European Union neither. And probably an European climate leadership hinges on a domestic financing as well as on a global cooperation. As Rodrigo has already told, the energy and the green agenda cross the borders of the countries. So such cooperation could be developed with the US and also with countries, as already mentioned, like China, Japan, like South Korea, and also the Latin American and African countries. Latin America is the region most affected by climate change. And the question that came to my mind is how do you think, how we can think that the US and the European Union could articulate their strategies, their preferences to define common goals in order to encompass and to commit other countries and regions like in the Latin America or in Africa. Furthermore, these transition agendas, these green transition agenda or the energy agenda, the energy transition will require, as Rim and Daniela mentioned, government as well as business changes. And regarding the current pandemic crisis and its economic and social consequences, do you think that it will be more difficult to commit, to get involved with the state, the people, as Rodrigo said, to mobilize the people and the population, mainly in